Hey everybody, it's Josh Morris with the Richmond Crappie Club. We've got our second tournament coming up this Sunday, March 22nd on the Chickahominy River. We'll be launching out of Rockahawk Campground, so I hope to see lots of you there. I just showed a couple clips of some spider rigging that I did over by the dam, right there where we're going to be launching. It's a pretty popular spot and lots of fish there, so if you've never fished the Chickahominy River before, it's pretty well known that fishing at the dam, within 50 yards of the dam, is usually a pretty good spot. Right now, when I went, I couldn't keep the catfish out of the boat. There were just so many catfish, but as you can see, I caught a couple of nice fish, some 12, 13-inch fish. So who knows, the tournament might be won there. You might have to fight with those catfish a little bit to try to catch a limit of crappie, but the crappie are still there. So you got a small boat, a kayak, something like that, just come on down, and everybody's going to be catching some fish, I think. Whether or not they're crappie, we'll have to see. The key there is trying to get the right depth. That's the thing. Typically in the winter you'll find those fish hanging right on the bottom. This time of the year the crappie, they'll hang down deep and then they'll come up and they'll feed. So they'll come up and chase after those bait balls. So getting the depth dialed in can be pretty tricky. One of the techniques I like to use at the dam, it's real popular, is spider rigging. And you'll see at the first tournament, that's what my wife and I decided to do, and it put quite a few fish in the boat. So I want to do a little tutorial on spider rigging, probably a technique that may be new to some of you, and some of you may have been doing it for a while. So I'm just going to show the way I do it, what I like to do, what I don't like to do, and give a couple tips and maybe help some of y'all out. So first of all, with spider rigging, you need to have a rod rack. You need to have something to hold your rods. What I've got two sets of EZT pole perch rod racks. And so I set in the front, I've got 4 on the front left and 4 on the front right. It's what they call a T-bar, so it holds 4 rods, and then one on the other side holds 4 rods. For my boat, I like to set up. If I had more room on my boat, I think I would use 1 rod rack per rod. I think that would help out a lot, because sometimes you get a bite and it'll shake the whole rod rack, and then it's hard to tell which rod it is. Sometimes by the time you figure out which rod got the bite, it's too late and the fish is gone. So if you've got the room, I think I would, and it's something that you want to do for a while, I think I would spend the money and get 1 rod rack for each rod. But the T-bars, they work great, they're much cheaper. So it's a good way to get into it and see if it's something you like. The second thing is figuring out what rod you want. Alright? I use a B&M Pro Staff trolling rod. I recently got the 16-footers. That's the debate a lot of people have, is what length rod you want to use. I think sometimes the rod length doesn't matter at all, and I think sometimes it does matter. I think the key is the distance the fish are away from your boat or away from your trolling motor. Now that live scopes come out, you can see how easily some of these fish get spooked. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I know there's videos showing that fish don't get spooked, but there's also quite a few situations where I know they do. So I think having a longer rod, the benefits, you're less likely to spook those fish. But at the same time, you need to have a rod length that you can carry those rods down the road, that you can manage. The longer the rod, the more difficult it is to learn how to use it. So I had 14-footers for a while, and then now I have 16-foot rods, and I do like them more. The disadvantage to a longer rod, like I said a few things before, but the other thing, a lot of times you can see that bite on the tip of the rod. Like you can see either your line move in a direction that you know it's not normally going to because of the wind or tide or whatever. That means you're either getting hung up or you've got a fish pulling it. The other thing, you can see that tip bounce. Now the rod tips that I have with these, they have an orange tip, which is nice, but that extra 2 feet, I think it makes a little bit of a difference being able to detect that bite. The other thing about the rod is you want to have a stiff backbone, because you'll catch stripers, catfish, but I mean huge bass, I mean all sorts of different species. I think you want something with a stiff rod to it, but it also needs to have a sensitive tip so that you can see that bite. with that being said, the other thing is when you're trolling, how much weight do you want to use? I think you want to use the lightest weight possible, but still being able to move efficiently and keep that line vertical. I don't like to have my line leaning so much because then you don't have the depth dialed in quite to what you want it to be. Most of the time I use 1/2 ounce weights. Occasionally I'll use 3/4 ounce weights. The less weight you use, the easier it is to detect that bite, but if you want to troll and move, you need a heavier weight to keep that line vertical. So, what types of setups do I use? Well, you could buy, I go to Grizzly Jig, buy stuff on there, but you can go anywhere. Here is a double minnow rig. So here's a double minnow rig, something that you can buy. It's pre-made. It's got a hook up here. It's got your weight. I think this is a 1/2 ounce setup. It's got another hook down here. Works pretty good. I like making my own rigs. There's a couple things I don't really like about this. I think really smart fish, which are typically bigger fish, I think they notice this weight. I like to have a lot of distance from my weight to my line. I know it may take longer for me sometimes to detect a bite, but I think I get more bites. So that's one thing. These are pretty good. You can buy these and go and fish, and you don't have to make anything your own. What I like to do, I like to make my own rigs. What I'll do, I'll make a rig and I'll tie it around this pool noodle. Take this pool noodle with me. If I break off, alright, if I get hung on a tree or fish breaks my line or whatever, instead of spending that time retying, I just get this pool noodle and get another line out. I'm good to go. As you can see, I've got quite the leader length here. I like using a 1.5 to about 1.5, maybe 2 foot leader. Alright. This right here is a 3/4 ounce weight. I like to use inline sinkers. I like to use these inline sinkers. I'll take this snap swivel. So here I've got my main line, which I use 8-pound slime line. I've just started using that. I like using the high vis so that you're more likely to see that line. And like I said, seeing the line is pretty important. I've just got a small snap swivel. So I'll get this, I'll attach it to my inline sinker, and you're good to go. And that's all there is to it. So that minnow has a lot of room to swim around, right? So if the fish bites it, I'm not going to know I have a fish until that line starts to move. And I mean, the fish might have to move 2 feet with it, or until that fish pulls it down. Or sometimes you'll see your pole stand up straight. The fish will come up and lift the weight up, and you'll see your rod tip straighten out. When you see that happen, set the hook, you've got a fish. So, as I said before, I still like to use these true turn hooks, number 2s. But anyways, that's the setup that I use here. There's 100 different ways to set it up, but this is what I like to do the best. I think I get more bites. The other thing to think about is what type of reel you want to use. I use a bait caster. I fish by myself quite a bit, and I think when I'm trying to get that net, and I also need to bring that fish in, I think it's easier using a bait caster than it is a spinning reel. Because with a spinning reel, if you're fishing really shallow, and I've spider rigged and I've caught 2-pound fish in 2 feet of water. All right, now I've got a 16-foot rod, and I've got that bait down 2 feet. So in order for that fish to get to me, I need to let out at least 14 feet, at least 14 feet of line. So the way to do that, if you've got a spinning reel, all right, your spinning reel here, you got to pull that line out. You got to constantly pull that line out as you're raising your rod, bringing that fish close to you. Now I'll tell you, if it's a little fish, you can swing it in the air, not a big deal. You got a big fish, I wouldn't do that. I'd try to keep that fish in the water. All right, you want to bring them up to the surface but you don't want their head flopping out of that water too much. You're going to lose that fish. So with the bait caster, I just press the button. I got my drag set right. So a little fish, it might not be pulling out my drag, but if the fish is big enough, it's going to pull that drag out, and I just control the tension with my thumb. I'm raising my rod up, I'm bringing that fish to me. I'm reaching back, grabbing the net and getting it ready. And then if I need to take up any slack, that's why I use a left-handed reel. Alright, because if I get the net with my left hand, I can set that net down and reel in some line if I need to and pick that net back up. If I've got a right-handed reel, it's going to be a little tricky to try to switch hands, and I don't really want to net the fish with my right hand. I prefer doing this. So I know everybody says that crappie are paper mouths, which is true, but most of the time when you've got those big fish, you need to be setting that hook hard. I know people get frustrated, they'll go to rip to set the hook, and they feel like they pull the hook out of the fish's mouth. I think most of the time you're pulling the hook out of a fish that's probably 7-8 inches long. But if you got a 2-pound fish that really comes up and nails it, and you get it to the boat and you lose it, you'll be wishing that you had a good hook set. I mean, think about bass fishing. When you're catching a 2-pound bass, I mean, you really want to rip and set that hook. I think the same is true for crappie fishing. So I like to get a hard hook set, and then after that I back off. Once I get a good hook set, I don't want to pressure that fish too much to get in the boat. The other thing to think about, when you've got your rod and your rod holder, you can see there's a little bit of a dent right here. That's because that's where my rod holder sits right here. Alright? Some people will set it so the rod holder is back like this. Then in order for you to get that fish out, then in order for you to get that pole out, you end up having to set the hook and then kind of wiggle around, and now you're giving that fish some slack. I set it right on the edge here, so in one swift motion, I grab that rod and I set that hook. Alright, I'm kind of moving it forward and setting the hook, and from then on, I'm keeping tension on that fish the entire time. And getting a good hook set. I mean, with these, you don't need to rip it and set the hook, with 2 hands or anything. I just use my wrist. I mean, you've got a 16-foot rod, so you think about it, when you just, a small action of the wrist can really set that hook good and get that rod moving. Well, if you have any other questions, just feel free to contact me, and hopefully I'll see you all at the tournament on Sunday, March 22nd at Rock-A-Hot Campground. Thanks.